Hello and welcome back. I'm Stephen Russell from New Life, and we are in our sessions, our series of the same God of yesterday, today and forever is our God today. So far we've discovered that the same God of that past world heals today in message number 1. Message number 2 had 3 parts to it, where we discovered that the same God of that world who led and guided the children of Israel with a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night still leads us with the various things we termed pillars. Now, in message 3, we discover that the same God of that world rescues us today as he did in those times. This is part A of message number 3, same God, the same one who rescues. We are tempted in our modern perspectives to distance ourselves from that time and seemingly a completely different world of yesteryear, presuming erroneously that God has stopped doing the acts of that world in our world. However, human experience connects us to those people. They too, as do we, experience hunger, fear, war, hatred, love, and all the other experiences so common to the human race. They experienced it, and we can connect with them because we experience the same kinds of things. Sometimes we find ourselves in trouble. Finding your way out of something isn't always that easy, is it? It can be hard, and it can happen to us many times in our lives. And perhaps you found different words to phrase these events in your lives. Being in a jam or a pickle would be one of them. Up against a wall, up against a tree, in a corner, up against it, at a dead end. Those kinds of phrases we use to describe a battle we're going through. We feel, as someone once said to me, the cheese fell off the cracker. The lights are on, but nobody's home. I guess you get my drift in this as well. The descriptive term is what I would call you're in a predicament. You might be in one presently, right now. You've made bad choices, maybe a series of them, or someone else you're subject to made bad decisions adversely affecting you. Your predicament might be financial, work-related, tied to your marriage or your children. It could be a number of different things related to neighbors and all manner of things. Whatever it is, you find yourself caught between a rock and a hard place. Nowhere to go, nowhere out, nowhere back, and even nowhere forward. We would say you are pretty much cornered. And let's talk about this for a few minutes. And we'll call this main point number 1, the word cornered. You're in a corner. And let's look at one of the worst predicaments the people of Israel in the Bible ever found themselves in. And it's a wonderful story that we read in the book of Exodus. It's the time of Moses, whom God used to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt, where they had been enslaved already for some 400 years. Now you may say, or you've heard of the famous 10 plagues that God brought down on Egypt, each increasing in intensity until finally Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, lets them go. So they went, and God leads them to a specific place. Here's what the Bible says about this specific situation. Then the Lord gave these instructions to Moses. Order the Israelites to turn back and camp at the sea. Camp there along the shore across from Baal-zephon. I have planned this in order to display my glory. So the Israelites camped there as they were told. Of course, taken from the NLV version. So what an amazing story this is as we read of this incident that takes place. And here they find themselves camped out at a particular place that God leads them to. And he leads them out of bondage of Egypt and then has them turn back towards Egypt with their backs against the sea. talk about being up against a wall here, a real difficult situation, a body of water that's often referred to as the Red Sea. But in actual fact, the Hebrew word reads rather Reed Sea, or Sea of Reeds, which a lot of scholars believe refers to the southern end of Lake Menzula, which is about 20 miles east of what was then known as the city of Ramses, the capital of Egypt. It was known as the Sea of Reeds because of the reeds growing on the banks, etc. The exact location, of course, is not really known. There are several bodies of water in that area that could have fit this biblical description and narrative. Either way, God leads them there and has them to camp out. So Egypt, which they had just left, was on one side. The sea is on the other side. And they were camped right in between these two forces, which seems like no big deal until we read what happens next. Listen to what the Bible says in Exodus chapter 14, verses 5, 7, and 9. When word reached the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds. What have we done, letting all those Israelite slaves get away? They asked. So Pharaoh harnessed his chariot and called up his troops. He took with him 600 of Egypt's best chariots, along with the rest of the chariots of Egypt. The Egyptians chased after them with all the forces of Pharaoh's army, all his horses and chariots, his charioteers and his troops. The Egyptians caught up with the people of Israel as they were camped beside the shore. Wow, what a story, taken out of the NLT again. There are two things that I want us to take note of in this particular description of what's going on. Firstly, the people of Israel were now in an official predicament. Just the very word we're using, in a predicament. They were caught between the vast armies of Egypt on the one side and the sea on the other. Secondly, and in addition, the God of the universe, the one leading the people out of Israel, that led them in the desert with a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire that we've talked about later on as they go into the desert. That God put them there. He had them camped there, set them up with no way out. God led them to where, in actual fact, they were trapped. Why? We think trapped, but that's not how God sees it. Let me read this again. The Bible says in Exodus 14, verse 4, out of the NLT, I have planned this in order, listen carefully here, to display my glory. And it's worth just pausing a moment and thinking about that, waiting on that a little bit. Have you ever considered that the corner, the predicament, you're back up against a wall kind of situation, that has no way out, was orchestrated or allowed by God? That it may not be an accident, but the very intention of God, that He wanted and wants to show Himself to you, display Himself to you, make Himself known to you. So, of course, you're thinking, well, if that's all that's going on, He didn't have to waste His time on that. Or even I've heard some folks say, why go to all that trouble? I'm a nobody. God's got bigger problems than me. It's only when there is no escape, no way out, no seeming way to solve a particular situation, that I think we all need to do two important things with God. First of all, turn to Him and learn from Him. So many times, I think in my life, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, when apart from being trapped, I would never turn or learn from the Lord. I'm busy with my life. Things are going well. Why bother? I wouldn't have to give my attention as fully because I'm just busy with life. I wouldn't have had my ears and my eyes opened if this situation hadn't have come across my path, if this predicament hadn't happened. God has now my attention, and sometimes that's all He's looking for. Or secondly, in our next point here. It's that it's only when we're knocked down to the ground that really we can begin to look up. We're right at the very bottom, and the only way forward is up. Sometimes God allows us to be in that situation, metaphorically speaking. So being cornered, being in a predicament, takes on a whole new dimension if God is going to get involved. So let's look at another aspect, and we'll call this main point now number 2. So the first one was cornered. Number 2, Moses' words, I think, are very important in this entire story that we're reading. What happens next? Well, we read that this is what takes place in Exodus chapter 14, verses 10 to 14. Again, out of the New Living Translation, the NLT, and it says this: As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this will happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, 'Leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness.' But Moses told the people, 'Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm.'" These are the words that Moses spoke. So we have two very different responses to this predicament, this situation, this cornered place that there's no escape from, shown here. And the first one comes from the people of Israel themselves. And I'm sure that we would be very willing to point fingers and name all of their wanting to die in Egypt and rather in the desert, and all kinds of various finger pointing scenarios we could paint. But let's be real. We are told that they panicked. And I mean a real full-scale, unmitigated panic station, as it seems it is the very end of the world, literally, for them, that they understand. But there's a second side to this as well. And you have the response of Moses. So the people respond, and now Moses responds. And it wasn't a response of, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay with clear blue skies, great picnic weather on the way, by the way," kind of response. No, in fact, we pick up in the story that Moses is quite irritated. In actual fact, he's angry for their complete lack of faith. And he had every right to be annoyed. They had just seen God liberate them from slavery through a series of supernatural events and activities and raw acts of power that God displays that led the leader, let's be honest here, of the largest and most powerful socio-political entity, the superpower of the day on the planet, to release them. To release his entire slave labor force. Can you imagine that? With at least a dozen or so miracles that took place to see them made free. So here they are, instantly wanting to abandon God, forget what he's done, and wish they could go back. And in response, Moses tells them 4 things to wake them up to what God has done for them. Let's look at that again in Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 to 14. This is what it says. But Moses told the people, "Don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." Let's list them for you. 1, don't be afraid. 2, stand still. 3, watch. Number 4, stay calm. So first of all, he says, don't be afraid. In other words, what he's saying there to them, if you catch the drift of the original language and what's going on there, is he's basically telling them to sort of show some courage, get some backbone. Secondly, he's telling them to stand still. In other words, stand firm. Don't run, don't hide. See this through. You are a people that have seen signs and wonders and miracles. Stand still. Stand firm. Thirdly, watch. Keep your eyes open, in other words. And this is happening for a reason. God is going to do something. Look. Open your eyes. This has been orchestrated, set up by God to reveal his glory. And fourthly, he says to them, stay calm. In actual fact, the original Hebrew literally reads, be quiet, and one particular Hebrew scholar puts it as actually with the intensity of the word and of Moses' words, it should actually be just shut up. As straightforward and as simple as that. So Moses, when they were trapped between the Egyptian army on one side and the sea on the other, says, get a grip, show some backbone, stand your ground, watch out for what God is going to do. And one more thing, shut up about it. That's a modern version, we could say, is translated there for us in modern vernacular. And so that might be exactly what some of us need to be reminded of today. Think about it. You're in a predicament. You're in a corner. You don't have an answer. Where do I go? Can't go back, can't go forward, sideways, it's closed off. Here I am trapped in this situation. We serve the same God of then, who rescued then, is the same God who rescues in our world. Why would he be different? As we saw in our first message. So because we think of what we might do when we face this kind of predicament, where we feel caught and trapped, instead of courage we give in to fear. Instead of standing firm, we run. We want to get out of it. We want to get far away from it as quickly as possible. Instead of watching for God, we look for anyone or anything, someone else to come to our rescue. And of course, instead of shutting our mouths, we are complaining to everyone around us. We start seeking sympathy from people, frantically going on in full panic mode, expressing worry, anxiety, all of which of course is sinful in a sense, if we're going to be trusting on the God of yesterday, today, and forever. We would think that we have heard enough, read enough, understood enough, and seen enough to know that that God of that world is the same God in our world. Folks, let's think about this. And it brings us to our point 3, which is a significant happening that takes place. And so instead of being in this full panic mode, this full scenario of running around and trying to find someone to relieve and take off the stress and remove our panic that we feel within us, we need to be reminded that God would never leave nor forsake us. His word is very clear in that. In fact, he sees us not as victims, but as ambassadors of his kingdom, the kingdom of light, the miraculous kingdom, the kingdom that brings freedom, unlocks the prison doors, and sets the captive free. That's the team we are on. We're not helpless. We're not broken down. We're not without a future. We're not without a way forward, because what God is looking for is that we'll begin to get his perspective on the issue. And he gave Moses that perspective, and that's why Moses responded the way he did. So our point 3, which is a significant happening to be considered on all levels, actually needs to be looked at in another message that we'll call message 3 part B of parting the sea. That's what the title is. All under the banner of the same God of then that rescued then rescues today. So cornered, without a way forward, now having to listen to Moses' words. This is part A. Part B, we will look at the Red Sea incident, because that needs to be looked at carefully and broken apart and unpacked, so we understand the significance of what took place at the Red Sea when God delivered them. I think it's as powerful as, of course, delivering them from the Egyptian taskmasters and Pharaoh himself in the land of Egypt. They're about to be delivered a second time, dramatically, and we'll look at that next week as we look at part B. The God who rescues. And so let me remind you in closing, you're facing those situations. The odds are against you. The likelihood of you coming out unscathed seems to be pretty remote at this point in time. But let me read those words again to remind you of what Moses said. But Moses told the people, 1, don't be afraid. 2, just stand still. 3, and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Number 4, stay calm. That's Exodus 14 verses 13 to 14 are the New Living Translations. We look forward to seeing you next week in our part B as we look at the parting of the Red Sea. What an enormous thing this really is. Thank you for joining us. God bless you, and we'll see you soon.